My landlord locked the heat at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So I cost him $1,500 in electricity. I woke up because my nose hurt. It wasn't a headache, and it wasn't a sinus infection. It was the physical sensation of the cartilage freezing. I took a breath, and the air that rushed into my lungs felt like I had just inhaled crushed glass. I blinked my eyes open, staring at the ceiling of my apartment, and saw a perfect, swirling cloud of white fog escape my lips. I wasn't camping. I wasn't sleeping in a car. I was in my luxury one-bedroom apartment in Chicago, under a duvet, a wool blanket, and a weighted throw, and I was shivering so violently that the headboard was rattling against the wall. I reached a stiff, claw-like hand out from the warmth of the covers to grab my phone from the nightstand. The metal casing of the phone was so cold it actually stung my fingertips. I tapped the screen. 6:15 a.m. Outside temperature, -5 degrees Fahrenheit, -20 degrees Celsius. Wind chill, -22 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, I whispered, my voice cracking. Okay, that's outside. Inside has to be better. I rolled out of bed, immediately regretting the decision as the cold air slapped my skin. I shoved my feet into fleece-lined slippers and shuffled out to the hallway, wrapping my robe tight enough to cut off circulation. I approached the thermostat, a sleek, white circle mounted on the wall. That Nest thermostat. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, had installed it 3 months ago, bragging about how it was the future of energy efficiency. I tapped the display. It lit up with a cheerful orange glow that felt mocking. Current temperature, 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Target temperature, 60 degrees Fahrenheit. 58. It was 58 degrees inside my home. I twisted the dial, trying to crank it up to a humane 72. The numbers spun, but then the screen flashed red. PIN required. I froze. Not just from the cold, but from the sudden realization of what was happening. I tried 0000. Incorrect. I tried 1234. Incorrect. The heat kicked on for a second, groaned, and then shut off because the ambient temperature was technically close enough to the target of 60. I felt the heat rising in my neck, a burning contrast to the ice in my toes. I grabbed my phone and dialed Henderson. Straight to voicemail. I dialed again. Voicemail. I opened my text messages. My thumbs were moving slow, stiff from the chill. Me, Henderson, the heat is locked at 60. It's 5 below zero outside. The apartment is freezing. I can see my breath in the kitchen. Unlock it. I stared at the bubbles, waiting. I paced the kitchen, opening the fridge just to feel the warm light of the bulb, which was ironically warmer than the air in the room. 5 minutes passed. The phone buzzed. Henderson, morning. Gas rates hiked 20% this month. We all have to tighten our belts. 60 is livable. Utilities are included, not unlimited. Put on a sweater. I stared at the screen. I read it 3 times. Put on a sweater. I looked down at my outfit. I was wearing thermal pajamas, a robe, and wool socks. I was already wearing the sweater. Me, this is illegal. You have to provide adequate heat. Henderson, legal requirement in the city is 66 during the day and 60 at night. It's 6:30 a.m. It's night. Check the bylaws. And don't think about plugging in a space heater. Lease Section 14b explicitly forbids high wattage resistance heating elements due to fire risk. I have alerts on the panel. If I see a spike consistent with a heater, I evict. Stay warm. I threw the phone. It hit the couch cushions with a dull thud. He was right. I knew the lease. I remembered signing it. Section 14b, strictly no space heaters, kerosene heaters, or electric blankets due to older wiring and fire hazards. He had me boxed in. He held the digital key to the furnace, and he was sitting in his own house, which I guarantee was set to a cozy 75 degrees, sipping coffee while I turned into a popsicle. I went to the kitchen to make coffee, but the water from the tap was so cold it hurt my teeth just to look at it. As the kettle boiled, I huddled over the stove, warming my hands on the rising steam. "Tighten our belts," I muttered to the empty room. "Gas is expensive. I'm a senior systems architect. I work with server infrastructure. I deal with data centers." Henderson is a guy who inherited 3 buildings from his dad and thinks the cloud is actual water vapor in the sky. He saw utilities included as a selling point to get tenants in, and now that energy prices were climbing, he was trying to mitigate his losses by freezing us out. I walked over to the lease agreement, which I kept in the filing cabinet near my desk. I pulled it out, my hands trembling slightly. I scanned the document, looking for anything, any loophole. Section 14B, no space heaters. Section 14C, no open flames. Section 15, tenant shall not modify electrical fixtures. I kept reading. I read it word for word. I looked for excessive power usage. I looked for fair use policy. Nothing. The lease stated, rent includes all municipal utilities, water, gas, and electricity. There was no cap. There was no tiered system. It was a flat rate. And the only restrictions on devices were resistance heating elements. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It felt brittle, but it was there. "Okay, Henderson," I whispered. "No heaters. I can do that." I drove to my office an hour later. The roads were black ice and misery, but I had a mission. My company was in the middle of a hardware refresh. We had a storage room full of legacy gear, specifically, 3 Dell PowerEdge R940 server racks and a couple of custom GPU rigs we used for rendering 3D models and, unofficially, stress testing crypto algorithms back in the day. These weren't desktop computers. These were industrial slabs of silicon and steel. Each one contained 4 Intel Xeon processors and enough RAM to simulate a small universe. They were loud, they were heavy, and most importantly, they were inefficient as hell by modern standards. "Hey, Mike," I called out to the inventory manager. "Those decommissioned units in Bay 4. The ones we're recycling next week?" "Yeah." Mike looked up from his clipboard. "Can I borrow them for a home lab project? I need to test some load balancing scripts in a physical environment before we migrate the new cloud cluster." Mike shrugged. "Sure, man. Saves me from hauling them to the pallet jack. Just sign them out." "You taking the 4U units?" "All of them," I said. "And the GPU blades." It took me 3 trips to get them into my SUV. My suspension sagged. Getting the gear into the apartment was a workout. I had to use a dolly, sweating through my winter coat as I maneuvered these massive black metal rectangles into the elevator. A neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, watched me from her door. She looked freezing, wrapped in a shawl. "Moving out, dear?" she asked, her teeth chattering. "No, Mrs. Higgins," I grunted, pushing a 100-pound server over the threshold. "Just upgrading my home office. Stay warm." I set them up in the living room. I didn't have a rack, so I stacked them on the coffee table and the dining table, creating a sort of technological Stonehenge. I ran the power cables. I had to be careful here, I couldn't pop the breaker. I split the load. 1 rig into the kitchen circuit, 1 into the living room, and the heavy GPU unit into the bedroom outlet via a heavy-duty extension cord. I connected them all to a network switch. I booted them up. The sound was the first thing. It started as a low whine, like a distant turbine, and quickly ramped up to a roar. WHRRRRRR. The little LEDs flickered to life, green, amber, blue. It looked like the cockpit of a spaceship. Now, I needed a payload. I couldn't just let them idle. Computers save power when they idle. I needed them to sprint. I needed them to sweat. I loaded up a distributed computing client, something that searches for prime numbers and folds proteins for science. I set the CPU affinity to 100%. I overclocked the GPUs. Enter. The fans screamed. It sounded like a Harrier jet was hovering in my living room. The noise was incredible, a constant, aggressive whoosh of air. I sat back on the couch, watching the terminal windows scroll with endless streams of data. 10 minutes passed. I took off my wool hat. 20 minutes passed. I took off my scarf. 45 minutes later, the ambient temperature in the living room was 68 degrees. I walked over to the Nest thermostat. It still read, current, 62, because it was in the hallway, further away from the lab. But the living room? The living room was becoming a tropical zone. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a beer. I sat down on the couch, the roar of the fans drowning out the traffic outside. I pulled up the console. The exhaust temperature coming out of the back of the GPU rig was 120 degrees Fahrenheit. It was pumping pure, dry heat directly into the center of the room. By 8 p.m., I was in a t-shirt. By 10 p.m., the hallway thermostat read 72. The heat had finally drifted far enough to trick the sensor. The furnace didn't even try to turn on. It didn't need to. I slept that night with the bedroom door open, lulled to sleep by the white noise of 3,000 watts of electricity being converted into thermal energy. The next morning, I woke up sweating. I kicked the covers off. I walked into the living room. It was 78 degrees. The air was dry and smelled faintly of ozone and hot plastic, the smell of victory. I looked out the window. It was snowing sideways. People were walking their dogs bundled up like Arctic explorers. I stood there in my boxers, sipping iced coffee, pressing my hand against the cold glass. I sent a text to Henderson. Me, hey, apartment is feeling much better today. Thanks for the advice about the sweater. Henderson, good. Glad you came to your senses. Efficiency is key. I laughed. A loud, guttural laugh. Efficiency, I said to the screaming servers. Right. I kept them running. 24/7. I didn't turn them off when I went to work. I didn't turn them off when I went to the store. I let them crunch numbers, mine useless cryptocurrency, and simulate protein folding until the silicon was screaming for mercy. My apartment became the hottest spot in the building. Literally. I had to crack a window on the third day because it hit 82 degrees inside. Mrs. Higgins stopped me in the hall. Your apartment feels so warm when I walk past the door, she said. Come on in for a tea, Mrs. Higgins, I said. I'm running some simulations. She sat in my living room for an hour, thawing out her old bones, while the servers roared like a demonic choir. It's a bit loud, she shouted over the fans. It's the sound of productivity. I shouted back. 2 weeks went by. Then 3. The month ended. I knew the billing cycle. I knew exactly when the hammer would drop. Henderson managed the accounts personally. He got the aggregate bill for the building, and he tracked the unit usage to make sure nobody was growing weed or running a welding shop. It was a Tuesday morning. I was working from home, legitimately this time, with the server farm providing a nice, toasty 76-degree baseline. My phone rang. It wasn't a text. It was a call. Landlord flashed on the screen. I cleared my throat. I picked up. Hello. What the hell are you doing in there? Henderson didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was. He led with a scream that distorted the speaker. Good morning, Mr. Henderson, I said calmly. Is there an issue? An issue? An issue? I just got the ComEd bill. Your unit. Unit 4B. Do you know what the usage is? No idea, I said, leaning back in my chair and putting my feet up on the coffee table, inches from the roaring intake fans. I don't see the bills, remember. Utilities are included. You used 4,200 kilowatt-hours, he shrieked. That's 5 times the average. The bill for your unit alone is $1,500. My entire profit margin for the building is gone. Are you growing marijuana? I'm calling the police. I am not growing marijuana, I said. I don't do drugs. Then what is it? Do you have heaters? I told you. Section 14b. If I come over there and find a space heater, you are out on the street today. Come on over, I said. I'm home. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead. I stood up. I didn't hide anything. I tidied up the cables a bit, making sure no trip hazards were present. I put the lease agreement on the kitchen counter, open to Section 14b. 20 minutes later, there was a pounding on the door that shook the frame. Bam bam bam. I opened it. Henderson pushed past me like he was a SWAT team. He was red in the face, wearing a heavy parka. He stopped dead in the entryway. The wall of heat hit him first. It was a balmy 79 degrees in the hallway. Then, the sound hit him. The drone. The roar. He marched into the living room and froze. He stared at the stacks. The Dell R940s were churning away, their indicator lights blinking rapidly. The GPU rig was glowing with RGB lighting, looking like a cyberpunk cityscape. The fans were spinning so fast they were practically invisible. What? Henderson pointed a shaking finger at the table. What is this? Work, I said. I work in IT. These are enterprise servers. I'm running a cluster simulation for a client. He spun around, scanning the room, looking for the glowing orange coils of a space heater. He checked the corners. He checked under the curtains. He found nothing. This is heat, he yelled, gesturing at the air. It's hot as hell in here. Yeah, I nodded. Servers generate thermal output. It's a byproduct of processing power. Physics, you know. You can't run these here. He sputtered. This is industrial equipment. I walked over to the counter and tapped the lease. Show me where it says that. He marched over and grabbed the paper. No space heaters. They aren't heaters, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming very serious. They are computers. Section 14b bans resistance heating elements. These use processors. It's completely different technology. There is no fire risk, they have internal thermal shutdowns. Section 15, he shouted. Modifying electrical fixtures. I plugged them into the wall, Greg, I said, using his first name for the first time. I didn't change the outlets. I'm just using the electricity I pay for. Well, the electricity you pay for. He stared at the servers. He stared at me. He did the math in his head. $1,500 a month. If I kept this up until spring, I'd cost him nearly $5,000. Turn them off, he commanded. I can't, I lied. The simulation needs to run for, I don't know. 3 months. Maybe 4. Unless. I let the word hang there. Unless what? He snapped, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. He was overheating in his parka. Unless the ambient temperature in the apartment is managed by other means, I said. See, these machines have thermal throttling. If the room is already warm, I don't need to run the fans as high, and I can downclock the CPUs to prevent overheating. Actually, if the gas heat was working, I'd probably just move the project back to the office. It's noisy in here. I can barely sleep. Henderson looked at the thermostat. It was displaying a smug 79 degrees. He looked at the electric bill in his hand. $1,500. He looked at the servers, which were currently chewing through his bank account at a rate of 12 cents per kilowatt-hour. If I unlock the thermostat, he gritted out, his jaw tight, will you turn these off? If you unlock the thermostat, I corrected, and remove the cap. I want full control. If I want it 72, it's 72. If I want it 74, it's 74. And you sign an addendum that you won't touch it for the remainder of my lease. He breathed heavy through his nose. He knew he was beaten. Evicting me would take months. In that time, I could burn through 10 grand of electricity legally. Fine, he spat. He pulled out his phone. He opened the Nest app. He tapped a few times furiously. Beep. The thermostat on the wall clicked. The locked icon disappeared. It's done, he said. Turn them off. Now. Sure thing, I said. I walked over to the first server. I didn't just pull the plug, that's bad for the hardware. I sat down at the console and typed, sudo shutdown, H now. The first machine wound down. The pitch of the room dropped. I did the second. Then the third. The silence that followed was deafening. The roar faded into a hum, and then into nothing. Henderson stood there, listening to the silence. He wiped his forehead. You're a real piece of work, he said, turning to the door. Hey, Greg. I called out. He stopped, hand on the doorknob. Utilities are included, I reminded him. Next time, just pay for the gas. It's cheaper than the alternative. He slammed the door so hard the framed picture of a sailboat on the wall went crooked. I walked over to the thermostat. I dialed it to 72 degrees. I heard the gas furnace in the basement rumble to life, sending a gentle, affordable warmth through the vents. I returned the servers to work the next day. Mike asked how the load balancing went. I told him the results were conclusive. So, tell me. Am I the villain for exploiting a loophole to run a personal data center in my living room, or did a slumlord learn a very expensive lesson about the laws of thermodynamics?
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.